dignity. The night we visited Big Mike's clubhouse in Hickory, North Carolina, Brian, a fat, short, newly patched member, proudly displayed his colors. He looked like an accountant. His reward, 24 hours of reprieve. No rules, no consequences, no random beatings. Normal was his privilege. And his celebration began in earnest. Beer flowed, music blared. Probates hustled behind the bar, some already with black eyes and others with fresh shine. Brian's success inspired them. As the night wore on, a dull ache pressed against my temple. I thought only of sleep. It was well after midnight. I had been on my feet for more than 7 hours. Brian, drunk and exhilarated, cradled a beer in his hand. Gold liquid spilled onto his lap. A wet stain darkened his jeans. His cuts were still clean, still crisp. Addicts draped his arms, kissed his neck, dragged long nails through his cropped hair. Brian smiled, chuckled, enjoying the attention. Finally, he begged off and dozed asleep in a bunk bed. The crowd thinned. Harry, Johnny's chapter's enforcer, and his sidekick Rocket disappeared periodically into a private room to do lines of coke. The agents and I continued to serve the three well into the morning. Brian's snores punctuated Johnny's agitation. He skipped, brushed fine powder from his nose, and looked ready to burst. His studded rings glittered in the dim lights. He nudged Rocket and Harry, and their whispers reached a crescendo. The trio disappeared into a back room and returned minutes later laughing, but the sound reverberated like a threat. Brian had dozed off, still wearing his colors. No self-respecting 1%er ever fell asleep with his cuts on. The outlaws messed with Brian, tugged at his vest, punched him in the head as he slept. I heard the thuds, the grunts, the whispers. I knew what they were going to do to Brian, and I could do nothing. Finally, Johnny emerged from the dark back room, sweaty and flushed, and snapped his fingers at JD and me. "You two, go to sleep." Bobby and Gringo stayed to work at the bar. Dread followed me into the hallway as I headed toward the bunkers. An icy chill lingered in the room. 4 bunks lined in the far wall. No blankets, just ball mattresses. I sprawled fully dressed across the top cot, reversed my cuts, threaded my arms through the sleeves, and shut my eyes. On the upper level, I figured I was safe from Johnny's abuse. JD settled into the bunk below me. A pall of apprehension hung between us. Brian flashed in his mind's eye. He looked every bit the pasty-faced, rotund accountant dressed in violent costume. But stripped, he still faced himself. Predators like Johnny pounced before they abandoned prey. I recalled Johnny's rings, the size of my wrist. One strike could easily slice open flesh. Darkness enveloped me, and I fell into a restless sleep. I dreamed that Brian's face melted. "Get the fuck up," a voice boomed. Shortly before dawn, the beating began. Sound penetrated the thin drywall. JD shifted below me. His legs slid over the side of the cot. Hard thumps shook the room. Neither of us said anything. Brian's screams rattled the silence. I envisioned his blood streaking the wall, his face shredded by Johnny's rings, Johnny's hands a swollen mitt. "I love my colors," I heard Brian sputter. "I can't hear you," Johnny boomed. "I love my colors," Brian shouted. "You can't give a shit about your color." I recognized Rocket's disdain. JD's breathing labored. He dropped to the floor, his hand skimming his gun. The clubhouse, filled with sleeping outlaws, was an arsenal of automatic weapons. Johnny, Rocket, and Harry, each armed with his own revolver, could simply pull the trigger and sound the alarm. We would be dead in an instant as we rushed to protect Brian. Gringo and Bobby would have no time to react. The cover team would never know what happened. Our room grew suddenly darker, smaller, sounds amplified, moans and thuds like listening to wolves devour a rabbit. A wave of nausea roared in my throat. Separated only by plywood, our room shook with each punch. Rocket panicked from exertion. Harry egged the beating. JD and I inched towards the door, our shadow faces taut with tension. Mentally, we reviewed our options. Listen and do nothing. React and risk a firestorm. React and blow our cover. React, investigation over. We opened our door. But before we could react, Johnny yelled, "Get the fuck out of here," and Brian bolted, his face shredded like fruit pulp. He had a reprieve, I said. That night, I dreamed of exits. Flashing red signs with missing letters. Each door I opened led into wind, white space mirrors. Panic shot through me. I couldn't believe they lied. They had a code, rules of engagement. Betrayal did not compute. Brian's beating shook me up, rattled all of us. The 48-year-old full patch had nearly lost his life over club colors. He had followed the rules and trusted there would be no deviation from club policy. Johnny was the rogue, dangerous and unpredictable. Brian didn't let it go. He insisted he deserved to be an outlaw. He called the Copper Region boss, Les, to report his assailants. Furious, the two members had violated his orders. Les stripped both of their patches and demoted them. Johnny and Rocket, now reduced to mere outlaw probates, served at Brian's whim. Harry retired for 6 months. When he finally returned, he probated for 6 days. As further punishment, Les ordered each of them to pay a $1,000 fine for their insubordination and endure a black eye. That Brian returned to the Outlaws at all stunned me. He had a chance to reconsider, to resume life on the outside, but he traded the title accountant for outlaw, seduced by the promise of power. Later at Brian's federal trial, the prosecutor would ask him why he didn't leave when he had the chance. I was scared. What was I going to do on the outside? Who was I going to be? Maybe that was the problem. A person like Brian needed to be reprogrammed, retrained, to live outside, much the way I learned to live inside. But more than my costume, my survival depended on camouflage and mimicry. In order to blend with the animals, I had to perform like one, absorb their vicious racial slurs, condone their denigration of women, pretend to be just like them. It wasn't a role. I could afford to screw up. What really roused the Outlaws was denigrating whole categories of people, and as much as I hated the idea, I developed a way in, a midget routine that appealed to their base sensibilities. The Outlaws already graded their people as pets. One recited the story of Puppet, who hobbled with a cane, drank his own urine as part of a stage act, and once, during a wrestling match, stapled his opponent's head for fun. We should put them on an island, the outlaw quipped, and issue everyone hunting licenses. He roared with laughter, swiveled on his bar stool, and sloshed his beer onto his pants. Through my disdain, I forced the comedy. Broke terrible. Tense moments with my 20-minute midget routine, always acutely aware we might be all dying. My jokes did backfire, and to my horror, the Outlaws morphed my already tasteless rant into something even more perverse. Sex with Bridget the Midget, an infamous porn star who stood only 3 foot tall. We should get her for you, Eminem, the chapter's enforcer, winked at me and I filled with dread. I could handle drugs, sleep deprivation, even physical brutality, but I couldn't handle Bridget. They bought her for an evening, one confided to me later. We made a prospect hump her in the parking lot, over and over, like a fucking chain. I stressed about Bridget, worried the Outlaws might surprise me and prop her in a door frame behind the bar in a shadowy back room. The specter of her little body terrified me. I knew they would do it. They would think it was funny to watch a giant maneuver into a tiny woman. They might turn the whole thing into a sport, make others watch. The idea repulsed me. I can't do it, I warned the others. Tell her you're married, JD laughed. Lie, say you did it, then pay her off. But I wasn't amused. Dignity mattered, even for Bridget. She so distracted me that my guard slipped. As Bobby wiped beer stains and restocked the ice behind me, Les' question flew at me like a random dart. How did you two meet again? He wiped foam from his lips with the back of his hand. Bobby and I had reviewed our history 1,000 times before, but now I stumbled over the lines. He was my boss at a tree trimming business. The words dried in the back of my mouth. No shit, that's what I do, a young prospect piped up. Thin and pale, with a sprinkling of pimples across his cheeks, his revelation jarred me. What were the odds that someone actually worked as a tree trimmer? Sweat slicked my hands. Maybe he would disappear. What's your biggest bar? He pressed. What the fuck was a bar? Gringo appeared like punctuation and shoved chunks of ice into the refrigerator. He heard the banter and sensed my growing tension as I fudged an answer. My biggest bar? I stared at the ceiling as if the chip paint held the answer. 48 inches, right? Gringo interjected as he dropped off a bag of ice on the floor. I swallowed, grateful for his rescue. Yeah, that's it. My heart slammed into my chest. The prospect frowned, shrugged, apparently satisfied with my answer. Later, I called a tree service company and learned that the bar was actually slang for chainsaw. That night I crawled into the van, but sleep eluded me. Bridget floated into my conscience.